This is an Irreverent podcast. Check out irreverent.fm for shows from all our friends. Hello and welcome to Evangelical. I'm your host, Blake Chastain. My guest this week is Jamie Wright. Jamie is known online as The Very Worst Missionary and recently published her first book, The Very Worst Missionary, a memoir or whatever. Since these interviews are often structured in a sort of memoir format to begin with, our conversation covers a lot of what she also writes about in her book, as well as touching on criticism of mission work, evangelicalism, weirdos, and really why the saying, you're only saying something negative, and that sort of opinion doesn't really hold much weight. You can find Jamie's book everywhere, including a link to buy it right here in the show notes. You can also follow me on Twitter, @BRChastain. You can follow the show, @ExEvangelicalPod, and you can like the show on Facebook. Also, on Facebook, we have a Facebook community of over 2,000 people in the Ex-Evangelical Facebook group. Please seek that out if you want to find other people to talk about the Ex-Evangelical experience with. It's a great community, and I'm really proud of it. Really proud of the people there and the sort of conversation that happens there. So please seek that out if you want to find other people to talk to. And if you enjoy this show, please consider becoming a patron over at patreon.com/exevangelicalpod, and also by writing a review on iTunes. All right, let's get into it. Everybody, welcome to Ex-Evangelical. My guest this week is Jamie Wright. She is the blogger over at theveryworstmissionary.com, as well as the author of the new book, The Very Worst Missionary, a memoir or whatever. Welcome to the show, Jamie.
Thanks. Thank you for having me.
Yes, thanks for coming on. I have just recently finished your book, and I absolutely loved it. It was a very, very good read. And so I'm really happy that I have the opportunity to ask you questions about it, to be honest. So
I'm glad you liked it. That's really nice to hear.
Yeah, it's great. Where we usually start in the show, and I think I was sort of explaining to you, the sort of general flow of the show really follows the flow of your book as a memoir. So just for the first question here for you is, where did you grow up, and what was your first sort of experiences in church or other religious settings like?
Right. So I didn't grow up in church at all. I was actually raised in an anti-church household. Mm-hmm. So when I was a baby, my parents converted to Judaism, and we did that hardcore for several years legit. I went to a Jewish day school, and my brother and I were learning Hebrew, and we celebrated all the Jewish holidays, not just Hanukkah, Yom Kippur and Rosh Hashanah, all of it. We were Jews. And then that sort of, I don't know my parents' process, but that changed for them. And then when my dad came home right before Christmas, and he brought a crate into our house, this ratty old, I'm sure it was off the lot, Christmas Eve, off the lot that was closed or something, some leftover Christmas tree. And he brought it inside, and he was just my kids aren't growing up without a goddamn Christmas tree. And then we had a Christmas tree, and he brought gifts. He brought a VCR and a VHS tape back in the day. This was a million years ago.
Yeah. And then all of a sudden.
Yeah. And then we just, over the years, got less and less Jewish. Mm-hmm. But we didn't become anything else. We just were nothing.
Yeah.
Okay. So I identified as Jewish for a very long time, throughout my childhood for sure. And then as a teenager, I just sort of was well, I'm nothing.
Yeah. Yeah. So during some of those years where you sort of mentioned that you have a really great part of your book where you talk about you purchased a leather jacket, and then that was your you sort of donned that personality for several years.
Yeah. Yep. In my adolescence, I became that girl, the one with the biker jacket and the combat boots.
Mm-hmm. And then and then from there you through just a wild. I'm sorry. I'm actually just remembering a lot from your book about like the whole. You have a whole chapter that talks about butt hair, and
There is. It's not doesn't talk about the whole chapter. It's just
I
sort
know.
of part of the
Yeah,
chapter.
and
Butt hair.
yes,
It's
you're
an
right.
important topic. It's an
It is.
important modern topic that we should be talking about.
Yeah. Okay. So we were talking like that. This is sort of like when you have this sort of rebellious period, or this period where you feel sort of unmoored. Was that? I'm not trying to push a narrative or anything. Actually, I'm just curious. Like, was that? Did you feel like part of losing that Jewish sort of heritage had any part of that, or do you think it was just something else entirely?
I don't know. That's a good question. I mean, I really, we stopped doing the Jewish stuff when I was like 8, 9 years old.
Oh,
I mean,
okay.
just sort of trailed off from there.
Gotcha.
So, I mean, it sort of, I don't know. I mean, if we'd still been super Jewish, I don't know what kind of adolescence I would have had. Right. I don't think it would have changed much. I mean, that was just sort of the path I was on emotionally. And so I think that's just where I was headed no matter what, because I was kind of a broken kid with a lot of anxiety and issues. So I think that kind of like slutty leather clad girl was just who I was going to be no matter what.
Yeah. And then through this sequence of events, you get married very young, you have a child very young, and then from there you talk about how you were sort of the key sort of convert target.
Oh, perfect target, yeah, for like, yeah, your next intentional relationship. That's that was me.
And then that you, how was that you decided to like go into church one day and in that situation and in that sort of point in your life?
So part of my anti-Christian childhood was that I was taught that Christians were like huge losers who don't know how to think for themselves, who don't know how to stand on their own 2 feet, who need somebody to tell them how to live their lives, and they're just like people, weak people who need a crutch. And so as a teenage mom and a brand new wife and learning to be an adult and working full time, and I mean all of these things, and I just felt like I don't know what I'm doing. I need someone to tell me what to do. I need a stretcher. I don't even need a crutch. I need like somebody to carry me. I just was so lost and scared, and I just thought, well, I guess if Jesus is for the weaklings, then so I went to the closest suburban church, and the rest is in my book. The rest is, yeah, I mean, just it sort of snowballed from there.
Yeah, and you do talk about how like that was that was a good period for you in a lot of ways, right? Like that.
Oh yeah. I mean, there are times that I think, if I could just take a pill and go back to that simple faith, that easy, simple, super self-satisfying, like rich, rewarding, emotional faith, I think that would be nice sometimes. I mean, I miss it. I do. I miss it. But it was a really important period of my life. And honestly, the evangelical church walked me through it in tremendously important ways. And that's where my little like group of mom friends was, and my community, and the people that came through for me again and again when I needed help. So while I don't agree with really any of it today, it certainly had value for me at the time.
Yeah. And when was it you sort of started to feel like you were running into the sorts of like invisible barriers in those sorts of social circles?
It really just started like I'm a person with questions. Like that's just who I am. I'm kind of analytical and researchy, and I'm always like wondering, why that way, or what's, and so I would do these little Bible studies with the girls, the girls from my neighborhood or from church or whatever, or I would go to this women's retreat or women of faith or whatever, and they'd make these statements that felt so good, like everything happens for a reason, or, whatever. But didn't really fly, were just not true.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so, I think that needling it started to kind of pluck at the fabric of my faith, and it really just slowly unraveled over time.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, there were some incidents, that's for sure.
Yeah. And you were still newly married, and this was also something that you mentioned in the book was not something that your husband was involved in. And like, to use a Christianese term,
yeah,
that would be, you were unequally yoked at that point.
Yes. We were unequally yoked. That is so true. I prayed that prayer. I prayed that, Jesus, please. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So he wasn't into it at all. And he would say things like, don't you give that church my money and stuff like that. But he worked on Sundays, so it wasn't really a big deal. I could just go, go to church and take my baby and do my thing. And
then eventually he did begin attending because of his own reasons, correct? And then how did that sort of shift the sort of experience you had and with your whole family in mind?
It made it even better. It was like, okay, now we're the family. We're like the cute suburban family with the 3 boys and, with the cute little house, and we go to the park, and it was perfect. It felt perfect. It was like, oh, this is how it's supposed to be. Mom and dad we go to church on Sundays, and we put our kids in childcare, and then he goes off and does men's groups, and I do women's groups and whatever. And that was cool for a while. It was cool, but then we were like, oh my God, church has us separated a million ways to Sunday. We never even saw each other because we were doing so many church functions, and and so we ended up being like, well, okay, let's do something together. And that's how we ended up doing youth ministry. Yeah. So
gotcha.
That was.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I'm always curious about how couples sort of navigate the church experience as well as the sort of church obligations, just because as a couple, and we've attended church several times throughout our marriage, and even, long haul sorts of things, and the ways in which you get dragged in different directions as men or women, depending upon the type of church.
Right, the men and women can't mix.
That's right, yeah.
Except for Sunday mornings.
That's right, yeah. Men's Bible studies on Mondays at 5:30 with Dunkin' Donuts. Doesn't matter if your car gets towed almost by accident. That definitely is not something that almost happened to me.
That doesn't sound familiar, personal at all.
Yeah. So then you found this interesting thing you were able to do together. That's great. And the youth ministry, that's another thing that always interests me, just because I was a youth group kid, and then went to a Christian college and got all jaded about stuff, including youth group. But from what it sounds like in your book, you guys sound like the sort of youth group, leaders that ruled, that would be great
I hope so. Some of my favorite, I've received several little notes from some of the girls that were in my small groups or whatever, and they've got my book and read it, and that they love it, and they're just like, I'm so, they're just saying nice things, I'm so glad that you were my youth group leader, and it's just that's so fulfilling to me, and it means so much to me.
Yeah. And then those sorts of experiences are what eventually led you to Costa Rica, correct? The first dipping your toe in, and then
right. So it's funny because we were sort of in that process of disintegration. It was oh, we're definitely identifying all these issues, right? We're looking at the evangelical church and just being this does not sound like Jesus. This doesn't look like the church that Jesus would build. These aren't the people that Jesus would go to church. It was just, we were seeing all of these, all this hypocrisy and all this stuff. And then became youth group leaders, and so that was kind of its own little world. And so as we're having this deconstruction, or beginning the process of deconstruction, then we feel the call. That's major air quotes, feel the call. Like we just felt called to become missionaries, but like we wanted to be different missionaries. Like we wanted to be some like new breed of missionary that wasn't a total spaz, that wasn't like that, you know, that wore clothes that fit and that could be sociable. And like even in that, like, oh, we're going to go be missionaries, it was still that process of deconstruction. We were still going like, oh, we're going to do it different. We're going to be different. And then we got there and we were like, oh gosh, this was, oh.
The people asking questions to the people with the answers. The people with the answers are the people with the questions. So the people with the questions ask the people with the answers. The people with the answers won't tell the people with the questions the answer.
Yeah, I've been listening to Field Missionary too, and the way in which you've described there, as far as the people, just being such a wide swath of people that do not seem like they had any business being there, is
so many,
sort of wild. And then this was at the tail end of, like, you feel the call, you've funded yourself, you sold your house, right? And then you're there. And then that's
we kept our house. We did keep it.
Oh, okay, you kept the house. We
rented it out.
Okay,
we rented our house out.
Okay,
yeah.
you kept the house, but you emptied it, and then you
sold
there,
everything in it. Yes.
And that's
sold
when
all of our stuff.
That's when it sort of hits you right away that this was not what we thought we'd signed up for.
I mean, there was like a orientation, like a newcomers orientation for the language school that we were going to. So there to learn Spanish, and I walk in the room and I'm looking around at all these missionaries, and these are all people like me. They're all people who felt called and whose churches affirmed their calling, and who were like, oh yeah, you're gonna go. It's gonna be so amazing. It's gonna be so awesome. The world's so lucky that you're gonna go out into it. And we're all in this room, and I was just looking around like, this can't be real. Like, there were so many weirdos, like so many truly like, oh gosh, you're really like, you're different. You know, and jackasses, like these huge, complete assholes that I was just like, you're a dick. I've known you for 5 minutes and I think you're a dick. So like, how are you called and I'm called? And if you're not called, then maybe I'm not called. And it really, like 5 minutes into the missionary adventure, I was like, oh gosh, this is a mess. This is a clusterfuck.
And so in retrospect, you know, what do you think that sort of call impulse was that sort of led you, even you sort of felt dissuaded, you know, you were discouraged right away. But what do you think in retrospect, what do you think that impulse was that behind the call?
Yeah, I think it was a combination. Happy Christian family, was not happy or perfect, not even close. We were a mess. My marriage was a mess. My kids were a mess. Like, there was just so much happening. And I really think that a big part of it was that, for me anyway, I thought, if we do this, like if we make this big sacrifice, if we sell all of our stuff and we take our kids to this foreign country, God will fix us. Like, God will bless us and he will fix us. And so there was, and I would not have recognized this at the time, but there's a lot of bargaining, I think, happening in my own kind of process.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, it's sort of the messaging, especially in like the evangelical church, is like, do these things. God makes promises. There's books of God's promises that sell like hotcakes. So yeah. So it's, and with those other stressors, yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And then bonus, you get to go live in paradise.
Right.
And someone else will pay.
Right.
You know, so it was just like, it was a combo. It was this like weird combination. It was like the perfect storm. And, you know, it took 6 months and we were there. Yeah.
Yeah. And then amongst that, within that time, how quickly does everything sort of start to snowball as far as the activities that you have to do. Because how long were you in language school, and like what were the expectations for like when you were supposed to start your ministry and all those
Right.
things? Like what? I'm curious about that.
We were supposed to be in language school for a year,
Mm-hmm.
but the first weekend that we were there, the first weekend in the country, we were staying like on this, on this ministry campus, and there was a baptism happening that weekend, that Sunday, and they were like, "Well, come on and help. You're missionaries too now." So our first act as missionaries was to help with this baptism of complete strangers that we'd never met before and never saw again. And then after that, we went to, so we didn't speak the language. We had literally nothing to contribute, but there's my husband was in the pool dunking this dude, and I'm just like, "Oh wow, look at us taking pictures! Like, well, look at us being missionaries. We're awesome." So we dove right in. I mean, really, but so then we were supposed to be in language school for a year, and I wrote about this in the book, so I feel like I need to get it right. But now I can't remember how many months he did it. Oh, it was a trimester system. So he did one trimester. So it was like 3 months or 4 months.
Mm-hmm.
And then he got to bail, and he got to go to work and be a real missionary.
Mm.
Yeah. So he got to bail on
Okay.
language school and get started, and I had to stay
Okay.
for 2 more. Was it 2 more semesters? I don't remember how much I did, but yeah, it was 2 more. So yeah, so he got to go do the work and be like in the community and meet people, and I was stuck in classrooms with missionaries, like wannabe missionaries, all day long. It was not a great time.
Okay. Yeah. That sounds. If you have second thoughts within 5 minutes, I'm sure that a year of that does not help the situation.
If they were evangelizing me the whole time.
Wait.
Like these missionaries were like, "She's a heathen." Like they would not leave me the fuck alone. I'm not kidding. Like they would do like chapel, and they loved chapel because they're all pastors, right? And they're pastors' wives, and they would just like hash out, like drag out their favorite sermon ever for
Mm-hmm.
chapel. And so like they would just be like, "Jamie, you should come to chapel with us. It's like super fun." And I was just like, "Yeah, no, I'm not doing that." But
awesome.
they were always like, "You should come to church with us. You should meet my friend Jesus." This is so dumb.
Awesome. Yeah. Nothing like Christian passive aggressive
Mm-hmm.
comments.
Right.
So even in that situation, you sort of felt like this person standing on the sidelines a little bit. Was that fair to say?
Yeah, I mean, a black sheep is definitely, it's kind of the arena that I live in, and I'm fine with that. But yeah, I was on the margins of the missionary community for sure. For sure.
And during that time, your husband was working, and then you were just sort of stranded and also like maintaining the house and that sort of stuff. And that was your
Yes.
sort of experience initially.
Yeah, and we didn't hire a maid. All the missionaries hired maids, and we didn't because I felt guilty. Like I just was like, "That's weird. I can't do it." And so yeah, keeping up with my kids and helping them adjust and do their homework and all that stuff, and then yeah, doing the like housewife deal and going to school. It was the first year was like not super fun for me.
And being this sort of observant person and sort of seeing the way in which the culture was and the way that you and the other missionaries were imposing on it, was that something that you talked about with the other missionaries? And if so, like how was that taken?
I think there were some like there were like little factions at the school. So there was like the cool kids, and like we would go out for pizzas and beer, and like we were the drinkers and the tattooed people, like,
Mm-hmm.
and we had good talks. But and then there were like like more conservative. There's like a super conservative group and like a midline group. Like so there was definitely other missionaries that we could talk to about kind of just like, oh, this is weird, or that guy's weird, or mostly we just talk shit about other missionaries, like, oh, like poor country that he's going to, that kind of stuff. But it's different because this was our life, like our livelihood. It was our paychecks, and so to really start questioning that felt kind of dangerous. Like everyone there, everyone that just arrived in the field was like, oh gosh, we've just given up everything, and everyone's like, rah rah missions. So I don't think I talked about it a lot when I was in mission school or in language school. Sorry.
Mm-hmm. And then when within this timeline of, I think you were there for 5 years, correct? That was yeah. So what was the timeline for starting and writing your blog? And
so I actually started my blog in like before we hit the field, like a month or something before we hit the field, and I wrote one post, and then like 18 months later, it was in our second year. I was super, super depressed. Like I was just in a terrible space, and I just felt useless, and I was very unhappy. And I thought, well, you know what? I'm going to communicate. I'm going to be the communicator because that's something I can do from home. I don't have to put on pants. I don't have to leave. I don't have to interact with anyone. So I started writing the newsletters, and this is like before we had these like big batch mail services. So
right, yeah.
I would have to like make these little batches, and then you get all these return. It was such a pain. I hated it. Oh my gosh. So when I realized I could just write a blog and then invite people to just like look at that, that was so much easier. So I started blogging, and I was blogging like a missionary. It's all there. It's all still there. Like anybody who wants to go scroll back and, see the charming little whatever stories, they're in there. But, telling stories that made us look like God was using us, and made it look like every little interaction was important, and, God breathed. And then but all while this other turmoil is happening inside of me, and I'm just like so frustrated with missions, and I was frustrated with missionaries, and frustrated with myself, and realizing like I can get on Facebook and write like, oh, it's really raining cats and dogs out there today, and people would be like, oh my gosh, Jamie, Costa Rica's so lucky to have you. Like, oh, it's so awesome that you're there. God's really using you. And I knew that was not true. Like that was simply not true. Because I was sitting at home in my pajamas all day, super depressed. And so that, like, it just really started to weigh heavily on me. And then there was an incident with a gecko. So I don't know if you want me to talk about that or not, but
you're welcome to, or people can read it in the book. Both of them are.
I did write about it in the book. I basically, to summarize, I went to sit down. I was sitting on the couch, just kind of like poking around Facebook or whatever, doing dumb shit on my computer. And I went up to use the bathroom. Like I hopped up to use the bathroom, ran in the bathroom, dropped my drawers, and there is a gecko like 3 inches away from my business. Like it was in my pants, like it was inside my pants. It was just chilling, like on my leg, like just stuck on my thigh with its little suction cup toes. And I lost it. I totally lost it. I was just like, nope. I'm done. And I had like this little kind of meltdown with God, where I was just like, fuck this. This is a mess. And then I just thought, you know what, I'm gonna talk about this more honestly. Mm-hmm. So that was kind of the catalyst for really just being open and, okay. Sorry about that.
Oh, you're fine.
Are you there?
Yeah, I'm here.
Oh, did you hear that? I'm sorry.
Oh, no.
Okay.
It's fine.
Okay. Yeah. So just, that was the catalyst to just be more honest and, start talking about it. Mm-hmm. And really, 10 years ago, nobody was talking. I mean, very few people were engaged in these conversations. So to have someone just kind of like lay it out there on the internet, I think it was really, a lot of people were interested.
Yeah.
So it grew its own little audience really fast.
Yeah. And that's wonderful. I know that, my sister has been reading your stuff for years. She's sent me your stuff for a very long time.
Oh.
So yeah, and I think you're absolutely right. Like it is the honesty that people respond to, because it's the weird thing about evangelicalism. I mean, I know I don't need to tell you. Like the negativity of almost any kind is discouraged unless it's like a particular sort of political negativity.
Right. Yeah, unless you're being negative about Black people, then you're fine.
or queer people,
Or the gays. Yeah.
Yep.
Like, yeah.
Yep. Or women that speak for themselves, and
Right.
yeah.
Right.
So you have that to deal with, but then the thing is that like everybody thinks these things, like
So many people.
yeah. So it's a very small number of people that are like just they totally fit in the evangelical mold like perfectly, and like it's a very tight mold, and not a lot of people fit into it. So the fact that you've been doing that for so long is just awesome, because that's a huge outlet for people to realize that they're not alone, which is like probably the most powerful thing for like someone feeling like they're stuck in evangelicalism, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think it is helpful when you see somebody kind of exploring these issues that you recognize, but you're afraid to talk about, or that you've tried to talk about and were, got the finger wagging, like, don't you dare. I think it makes people feel a little more brave, a little more courageous to speak up when somebody else is doing it too.
Right. So. Yeah. Yeah. And I am curious your just as far as your thoughts just on how it's been received over the years, and I mean you, and the way in which just the way in which evangelicalism does sort of just try to quash and just push down dissent, and the sorts of things that you've had to fight, fend off, even just because you like the word fuck too. I mean, like, I mean,
so stupid.
Right.
Yeah, I've certainly had my share of pushback, and the truth is, I just don't care. Like, it doesn't bother me at all. I don't care. Like, if it makes somebody feel better to spend their time like writing me an email or whatever about whatever, they can do that. They're generally not going to get a response, or they're certainly not going to get the response they want. But I don't care about it. Like, to me, it's a conversation, and the thing is, I'm not married to to my ideas, right? I'm growing up, I'm learning, and so to say, hey, this is what I believe, or this is what I discovered, or this is what I'm learning, and have someone be like, here's why you're so stupid, idiot. I'm just like, oh, okay, like, if either be part of the conversation or don't, but you don't get to shut it down.
Right.
Like, it's just, to me, I'm just like, well, I'm okay. I'll be over here still talking. Cause like, what am I going to do? Shut up because somebody's like, oh, you're being divisive. Okay. I want to be divided from a lot of you. I don't want to be
right.
attached to you.
Yeah.
So I'm fine with that.
Right. Yeah. Because you don't, what's that, the term? You don't want to divide Christ's body, right?
Yeah. Except that I do. Like,
right. Yeah.
if we get rid of cancer, we do that. We cut it out of our bodies. That's a thing. So there are there's absolutely parts of the quote unquote body of Christ that I'd be happy to live without.
Right. Yeah. One of the things that I know is evident in your book, and I think you do mention it later in your book more explicitly, is that you just have this, because of your experiences, you have like a very finely tuned like BS meter, like, and that seems to have served you like very well, in that just it lends to the observation that you do, and the sorts of things that you comment about. So more specifically in regards to like missions, and the sort of critique that you see there, what is it? I know this is a broad question, but I want to sort of kick off at this part of the conversations about missions in general, and how you think they are not actually meeting the needs of the communities that they're in, and the sorts of things that that are extremely worthy of critique and some very deep thought about what all these churches are doing when they send missionaries out.
Right. Well, that is true. I do think I have a fairly well-developed crap detector. Like, it's just something that's part of me. And so when I was on the mission field looking around and, and hearing people, the things we say in missions are so stupid. I mean, the things we say, like, oh, you know what? As long as just one person is whatever, helped, saved, I don't know, impacted, right. Like whatever. Or as long as we planted seeds.
Yeah.
Or as long as, like, all this weird, nebulous, immeasurable language is applied to missions. And even like the word missions, it doesn't mean anything. And that was a thing for me too in the very beginning when we were getting ready to move abroad. People would be like, oh, like it, or when my job title changed and people would say, what do you do? And I would say, I'm a missionary. They'd say, oh, cool. What do you do? Because it literally means absolutely nothing.
Mm-hmm.
Missionary means nothing. And so, you could, this idea that you can just like raise your hand and decide what you're going to do anywhere in the world and that the church will pay for it. And you can just be a missionary is absurd. And then the language that we apply and the ideas that we apply to the selection process is insane. It's insane. Like, we were told over and over again, God doesn't call the equipped, he equips the called. And just patted on the back for being like totally unprepared and have nothing to contribute. Like, oh, that's perfect. Then you're the one God wants. And that's just bullshit. It's just not, it's such garbage. And so living in a foreign country and seeing this, like, especially a country like Costa Rica that is inundated. I mean, it is saturated, absolutely saturated with missionaries. They're everywhere. Mm-hmm. They're around every corner. And so seeing like these interactions between the missions community itself and then the missions community with the local community, I mean, it was just, it never quite added up.
Mm-hmm.
And I participated in much of this. Like I worked in a like a barrio, like a poor community, and showed up with bananas for poor kids and, colored pictures of them and just cluelessly showed up in their community over and over again to quote unquote help. And I don't know what I thought I was doing, but, as I learned more about Costa Rica and as I got more Costa Rican friends, like real Costa Rican friends, not missionary friends, not
mm-hmm.
people who were like into missionaries, but like real Costa Ricans who were like, that's bullshit. And here's why. That was hugely eye-opening for me. Just go, oh, you know what? That makes sense. Like, this is super patronizing that we're just going to show up in your country and think that we can help you. And also, it's a Catholic country, so why the hell are we here?
Yeah. It's a pretty big question.
Also, like, there's lack of Jesus but there it is. So it was just this weird, like, what are we doing? Examine that, the more I felt like, oh, nothing. We're just wasting money.
Yeah. And that was one of the things, the money part, even just that last bit that you said, like, there's so much money. Listening to you and to Corey talk, I had no idea that it was such an industry. And I feel like
Billions
that's sort of
dollars
hiding in plain sight, like if you're not sort of aware of it.
Yep. Oh gosh, billions of dollars. And the world should look different.
Mm-hmm.
Like if we're throwing billions of dollars at the world in the form of missionaries, both short-term and long-term, then the world should look different, or the church should look different. Something should look different. But it's not. And people who have studied it are finding that it's like actual science says this is not a good thing. Like, it's not helping the people who go. It's not helping the people who receive them. It's not helping. So at some point, can we just sit back and say, if it's not helping, should we stop?
Yeah. at one point is the Great Commission sort of fulfilled? Like as far as at least that part of it.
Totally. And if that's your deal, if that's the missions deal, like if you're
Right.
into, like if you're like, oh, we're supposed to go and baptize all nations, whatever, I don't, whatever, um, then okay, but you're not going to those countries because you don't want to be beheaded. Like
Yeah.
missionaries aren't going to these countries that are like unchurched or untouched by the gospel, or however you want to put it.
Right.
Like they don't want to go there. They want to go to Costa Rica. They want to go to Uganda. They want to go to, like pretty places that give them cool Instagram pictures.
So I understand the sort of perils of two white people talking about race, but I'm sure that there was part of this that also had a sort of that also had like a racial component. So
Absolutely.
amongst the racial and economic components, what, like most specifically, I feel like I would be doing the wrong thing if I didn't ask that question and sort of try to understand what was sort of at play there, like within the mission organization you were with, as well as this sort of overall, just the overall sort of tenor of things amongst the other missionaries too.
Our organization, I mean, I don't really want to talk about them because I think I could maybe get sued or something.
Okay. You can skip that. I can.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I will just say we worked with people who genuinely had a desire to work to lift up local leaders and did that in a lot of ways. But no matter how hard no matter how much the white missionaries elevated the Latino missionaries, the white missionaries were still on top. Always. They were the ones with the money. They were the ones who made the decisions. They were in charge. I mean, it was definitely a weird imbalance of, well, all of it. It was just imbalanced. And, there is absolutely this sense of like white American colonialization in missions. And for us to think that we need to export our super broken, super like fucked up evangelical church into other communities is like, it's such a joke. Like, just stop. Your community doesn't need it. And certainly like trying to install that in another country is not a good idea.
Yeah.
But, and I will say this too, just on a personal level, as far as race, I'd never been the only white person in a room until we moved to Costa Rica. I'd never been that mom who's sitting in in the school gymnasium while the kids do a play and seeing my kids standing out like the platinum blonde, oh, there's the American kid. And still I felt my privilege every day. Still, I knew that I was at the top of the food chain because I was American and I was white. And it was incredibly eye-opening for me. Both like the feeling of like, okay, I'm a minority in this community, which is, I've never experienced that before. And then the feeling of like, oh, I have so much privilege. Like I can go anywhere in the world and not feel afraid because I know there's an American embassy and I'm a white chick and somebody will get me there. So anyway, that was, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a lot to experience.
Sorry, it's the meds. You're probably like, okay, that was not where I thought that was going.
No. I know that was a heavier question. I should probably mention that a lot of times I do get actually flummoxed by people's answers, and it sets my own sort of gears off spinning, and it gets worse when I don't have the video.
Oh,
So,
we can turn it back on.
oh
It's up to you.
no, it's totally fine. So I'm letting you know about my own idiosyncrasies. Sorry, it's not
No, you're
it's
fine.
not you.
Good. Good.
So after all of this, you spend 5 years there, and then you decide to come back, and you continue this work within commenting and blogging and everything else. That's sort of the outcome of this for you, is that you, in many ways, find like
Purpose.
your purpose. Yeah, and that's great. I mean, amongst all the things that you experienced, amongst all the highs and lows you experienced, that for you seems to be like a redemptive. Is that, I mean, am I reading into that, or do you sort of feel the same about this being the outcome for you professionally?
I do think it's a sort of the redemptive theme of my life, is that it all kind of has added up to bringing me to this space, and I am, because of how I was raised, who I was born to be, and how I was raised, and the whole nature and nurture, all of that, because of all of that, and because of the experiences that I've had, and the everything. I have been able to do this. I was able to walk into the mission field, look around, and say, "This is fucked up." I was able to make the decision to say it out loud, and that has sort of parlayed into a career. And I mean, it's nothing I ever would have chosen for myself. I don't love writing. I'm not like, woo, I'm going to write books. Like, it's not my lifelong dream. And sometimes I feel guilty, like, oh, I stole somebody else's dream. Like, this is some chick that like since she was 7 years old, wanted to publish a book and whatever, do all this stuff. And I'm doing it because I do feel purpose in it. I do feel very strongly that we need to flip the script on missions and on the evangelical church, and we need to, like, shit needs to change.
Yeah.
So I'll keep talking about it.
Yeah, and that's awesome. And on that note, one of my absolute favorite things, you have some great things. Well, at the beginning of the book, you talk about, like, as far as the sense of there being in net. I'm gonna pull it up. I don't know how you feel about people reading your stuff, like on a thing.
You can't. I don't have any opinions about it.
You say,
yeah.
One of the things you mentioned at the beginning is, you says, "I believe the honest truth is like an invitation into another person's soul," which I absolutely love. And then later, near the conclusion, you talk about how it's okay to be the person to point out the shit that's wrong, like, and to have something that's just negative to say. And I feel like that's really powerful. And just speaking on a personal note, like, that meant a lot to me, just because a lot of people, they hear the term evangelical and they think it's just like this negative thing. And, I have plenty of talking points about how it's just like repudiation of evangelicalism. You can still be a Christian, whatever. All these different things. Like, you can also not be a Christian, and that's A-okay too. Like, but like evangelicalism is the thing that we're saying is wrong, is like messed up and causing damage to people. And to me, that was both of those things sort of together in the way that it, like, were bookended your writing in this book, meant a lot, because these conversations, and the reason why this is a podcast, is so people can be invited into someone's space and into someone's story. And a lot of people's stories have really negative shit in them, and it's cathartic to share it. So I'm, very inspired by that. And so I just wanted to mention that sort of on a personal note, because I think that's absolutely important, is that, like, in this day and age, when there has been so much that just has gone unsaid. It's time to start, and it's time to give
Right.
as many people as possible a mic. Like, I'm just primarily the host. I don't need to be the one talking, and that's, anyways.
That's really cool, and I totally agree. I mean, it's helpful. It's helpful to people. It is when you can say something like, "Hey, that's broken," and other people who have been like thinking it, like, "I thought, I was wondering, I had my suspicions." When you affirm that in them, like it is so powerful and so freeing.
Right.
Because it's like permission. It's like, oh, wait, I have permission to wonder. I have permission to examine these things myself. And I have permission to say, hey, I think that's wrong, even if I don't know how to fix it. I just think it's really helpful for people to know that like they're not alone.
Yeah. That is absolutely true. And they're far less alone than they think because when you give them permission, then they can begin to wonder the things that they thought were broken might be, and the things that they've been told were broken. About just being human, like that's just being human.
Yep. Absolutely.
Your book is wonderful because it's just absolutely, brimming with humanity and great. Even if you don't like being a writer, you're very adept at being a writer. And it was an absolute pleasure to read.
Thanks for reading it. I still can't believe that like this is a thing. Like it's out there and people are just like reading it, and everyone's been very kind. And
does it feel sort of different than just writing a blog and sort of doing that, and it's actually something that someone printed and sold and stocked and all those things?
Yeah, it feels really different than writing a blog where I'm like, oh, I can delete that if I want. Where I can, like in 10 years when I feel like, oh, that was an idiotic thing to say, I can change it. But now it's out there, and it's like kind of doing its own thing, which is, it's cool. Like it's cool to see, but it's also like, whoa, I don't know what I expected, but I guess I didn't expect people to buy it and read it. So. Yeah.
Well, one of the things I do like to ask people, especially people that are still openly, wrestling with these sorts of questions, is what is it that keeps you doing that? Like, what is it that makes you keep engaging with your faith in these terms and within Christianity, and what sort of compels you like forward and keeps you interested?
It's fun. I mean, honestly, like it's fun. I love these conversations. I enjoy like the process of kind of examining life and the world, and I love the questions and the puzzle piecing together of like, how does it all work? How does God and the universe and humanity, like, how do we all fit together, and how can we do this better? And I just really enjoy it. Like, it is actually fun for me. And then truthfully, it's been really rewarding, like to hear from other people who are walking down the same path, and who are like, oh, like I felt alone and now I don't, or I had all these feelings that I didn't know how to put into words, and now I have words for them. Like that's really cool. Like that kind of connection, that it feels very spiritual to me and very important, and it feels purposeful.
That's great. What do you think will be sort of next for you after this? This seems like a pretty big mountain to climb.
I think I'll have to write another book.
You sound cautiously optimistic about it.
Yeah, I think well, I'm not really 100% sure, but I'm leaning toward writing a book that's more focused on missions, because this was a genuine memoir. Like, this was like, and truly, I felt like there were some questions I needed to answer before I dove into the mission stuff, and I wanted to do that with this book. You know, like the whole, like, who do you think you are? Well, guess what? This is who I am, and this is why this is why I'm able to say these things and why I do say these things. And so kind of like getting that out there and as like a starting off point. Mm-hmm. And now I feel a little better about kind of saying, okay, well, let's maybe dive a little more deeply into the mission stuff or the church stuff. I don't know, but it'll probably be another book, I guess.
Mm-hmm. Great. Yeah. Well, and I'm sure it will be great to read, because this one was wonderful. Well, where can people find you online? Where can they find your book?
They can find my book, The Very Worst Missionary, a memoir or whatever, at book retailers everywhere. So Amazon, Barnes & Noble. I can't think of any more. But
that's all that are left now. That's all of them. It feels like.
Libraries too. So if you can't buy it, go to the library, and if they don't have it, they'll buy it for you. So do that. And online, I am Jamie the VWM, like Very Worst Missionary, Jamie the VWM on Instagram and Twitter, and you can find me on Facebook at under the Very Worst Missionary. So if you just Google the Very Worst Missionary, you'll find all that stuff, basically. So,
great. Well,
yeah.
Jamie, thank you so much for being on the show. I really appreciate it.
It was absolutely my pleasure. Thanks for having me.